Hi, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We can't wait to have this conversation with you and colleagues from the UNICEF Afghanistan country office. I'm Callie King Guffey, and I work at UNICEF in the headquarters at New York City, and I work primarily on the Sustainable Development Goals and have very much enjoyed working with the Nord Anglia education school system and meeting a number of you students from the past few years. So I know that things have taken a turn and moved to this virtual world, but it's so wonderful to continue to connect and have discussions based on global issues. So thank you for using your time to be with us today. We're going to have a very interesting conversation with colleagues from the Afghanistan country office. And so I'm pleased to introduce Allison and Kasia, and supported by a former colleague, Letizia. So we're so happy to be joined by them today. Allison is UNICEF Afghanistan's Chief of Communication, Advocacy, and Civic Engagement. And Kasia is UNICEF C4D Manager, which stands for Communication for Development. Very interesting work. They're going to present for about 20 minutes on the role of social media and communications during the current COVID-19 crisis in Afghanistan. Talk a little bit about what it means to be a young person in Afghanistan today. And then we're going to open up to questions using the Q&A function. So at the bottom of the screen, you should see some icons with Q&A. Please type your questions there, and when we get to the interactive session, we're going to go through those and pose them to Allison and Kasia to answer. And so without further ado, I think I'm going to pass it to Letizia and team to kick it off.
Hello, everyone. For a few seconds, we're going to show our faces on video. Can you see us on the screen?
Yes, you look great.
Yeah. Perfect. So this is Letizia Delazin. I work in the donor relations team in UNICEF Afghanistan, and I am joined by two of my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Alison. I'm the Chief of Comms. Nice to be here.
And
hello, I'm Kasia. I'm Manager for Communication for Development. Welcome.
Great. As you saw our faces float on the video, we're now going to start sharing a PowerPoint presentation with a few images that will take you through a journey of Afghanistan. So let me make that bigger and where is it? Here. Okay, and we can start from here.
So, hi everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think it's going to be an interesting journey talking about Afghanistan. And I'm not sure how many people online knew where Afghanistan is actually located. We have a little map there that we're showing you, and what Afghanistan looks like. It looks like a partial tree, a partial fruit, with a stem poking out from somewhere. But that's Afghanistan for you, and it's just a beautiful country lodged between Central and Southern Asia. And the interesting history of Afghanistan, it has this mix of Central and Southern Asia mix, along the Silk Route, if some of us know about the Silk Route journey. So we have a little bit of everything in Afghanistan and a lot of mixed culture. Yes, next slide, please. Here we just show a map of Afghanistan. We try to show you one that does not necessarily reflect where UNICEF works, but just giving you how mixed and interesting Afghanistan can be. So there you can see that Afghanistan is surrounded by a lot of this, what we call the STAN countries. So you have Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and we have Iran. So, and all of these countries actually influence Afghanistan. So it's a landlocked country with all of this. And amongst Afghans, there are 4 languages that drive that, and all of that is based on these our borders. So we speak Pashto here, we speak Dari, we speak Turkmen, and we speak one more, Tajik, yeah. So we have those 4, and you can see that it is because of those countries that we surround ourselves with. That's why we speak in those languages. So Afghanistan is an interesting mix, and all of the culture and all of the language and all of the behaviors across the borders actually influence the way we work and the way we engage with each other. Next slide, please. Here, I'm just showing you something that maybe you don't usually see in Afghanistan. Afghanistan loves sweets, right? Afghans love sweets. So for almost every event, you know, for a birthday, for a celebration, there's always a cake. And in the UNICEF office, there's always a cake coming in. But, you know, here is, I'm just showing you a little bit of what we may not necessarily see in the news about Afghanistan. And this is a little nice cafe shop. And on the t-shirt, you say, "You are my top priority." So, you know, this is really engaging, and this is really so sweet. And this very rich chocolate cake is something that we all share in the UNICEF office. So we just wanted to show you just another dimension of how engaging and how diversified Afghans are. Next slide, please. This is another beautiful picture. I put it on just to show again. The Afghans celebrate New Year in March. It's called the Nowruz. And it's interesting because you needed to have these 7 fruits. And I'll throw the question, and then you can reply to me during the Q&A. If anybody can tell me from this photograph, what are the 7 fruits that the Afghans pull together, both the dried fruits and the other type of fruits. If you can identify them, maybe from either your country or somewhere you've visited before, let me see who can get the 7 fruits right, and maybe we can see whether we can have a prize for that student. Next slide, please. Here is what the Afghan street looks like, you know. I wanted to show this because it's so interesting. This is grilled meat is actually a big thing here in Afghanistan. So you have a lot of grilled chicken, a lot of grilled meat, and this is a local market, not very far from the UNICEF office, where you have the local Afghan bread, which actually is quite similar to what you have in Iran and the Middle Eastern region. So, you know, there are a lot of similarities in the culture, and it looks a little bit like pizza, but it's not. It's actually very beautiful, really, really nice bread. And, you know, you get addicted to it if you're living in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. And here you can see somebody happily, chirpily going by with some peaches and grapes and everything. And you can see how happy this young guy is. Pushing his cart across the country of, the streets of Kabul. This is in Kabul, the capital. And you can see, you know, he's really happy and going about his business. He's a young person who's actually supposed to be in school, but unfortunately in Afghanistan, child poverty is very high. So 60% of children in Afghanistan are poor. And poverty means that they're missing out on a number of issues. They're missing out on access to quality healthcare, access to education, access to protection, even access to shelter. So this happy looking guy, he's about 15, 16, and he's out here because he has to support his family. He has to contribute to the income of the family. And though he would love to be in school, he still has to do this. But he says, I happily do this because it helps me to contribute to my sister and my mother and help them to take care of the family. Next slide. And this is amazing. I mean, this is the typical outfit of an Afghan young lady, and they are looking amazing, you know. These girls are where you call the Blue Mosque. And I think if you Google about Afghanistan, there's a Blue Mosque in almost any major province of the country. But this is something, it's a historical place that, I mean, if you come to Afghanistan, you want to visit it. The architecture is just out of this world. You know, I've visited a few myself, and you know, it's just great. But these are 3 girls who are young women who are just out there and just taking a group photo like any young person, you know. And they're having a chit chat there and just trying to make sure that their photos maybe go on their Instagram accounts or something like that, like any young person would do. But then I wanted to use this photo to just position the fact that gender considerations a big issue in Afghanistan. This is really like an exceptional photograph, and this is why we wanted to show you, because for most young girls in Afghanistan, they cannot be exposed like this. They cannot even leave the house. They may not be able to go to school because of the distance that the school is. And so you will notice there's a great gender gap between boys and girls in terms of access to education, in terms of access to livelihood, in terms of access to employment, simply because it's a very conservative environment and they do not really allow the women to be exposed. However, there are these frontline young women today, a new demography that's really challenging the social norms in Afghanistan and demonstrating that they can contribute to the cultural, social, and economic development of their country. And that's why UNICEF is here. I love this photograph. I'm sure a lot of you know the UNICEF Young Ambassador, Greta, the climate change champion. And we used to have, before COVID-19, we used to have these Friday Futures across the world where young people are going out there marching and calling on policymakers to really invest in climate change because this is going to impact the next generation. Well, here I'm really pleased and proud to show you young Afghan girls on the road on Friday, also participating on Friday's Future, surrounded by armed military, because that's the context in Afghanistan. But despite the insecurity, despite the challenges, you can see these girls boldly on the street, also being part of a global march to address climate change for young people. This is just amazing, out of this world. Next. Okay, we wanted to introduce you to some of the shifts that are happening in terms of what the girls are doing in Afghanistan. There's one video I'll ask Leticia to share at the moment, and this one is about what we call futsal. Based on what I mentioned earlier, the issue of girls engaging in sports is almost unheard of. You know, you cannot be exposed, you cannot, because of the type of outfit you have to put on. But like I said, there are young girls today who are really pushing those social norms. And UNICEF is supporting a program called Sports for Development. And we will just share with you one amazing 1-minute video of how young girls are championing the issue of sports to promote girls' empowerment, girls' education, and girls' development. And this is actually portrayed across our social media platforms. So if you want to sort of loop in how social media has been able to play a role where girls don't have a space to articulate themselves, where they don't have a space offline to show themselves, social media has been an amazing tool by which we can amplify the voices of young people, especially young girls, and make their voices heard. So over to you, Leticia, and she will just show you this video.
میخوایم در آینده یک وکیل، یک قاضی موفق باشیم. من فوتبال را به خاطر بازی میکنم که من صحتمند نگاه میکنم و من سر حال هستم، میتونم در خودم خوبتر پیش ببرم.
I'm going to say something. Okay, thank you very much, Leticia. That was just one very energetic moment when we actually participated. It was all of these schools coming together
And it was so exciting. Even the national officers in UNICEF that participated to this event said they've never seen so much energy. And what we did was to use key messages. You know, they even had cheerleaders who were actually singing and rallying the crowds around key messages on behavior change, on advocacy for education, on girls' empowerment, and it was really a rallying moment. So these are really positive moments where we can see that for the next generation, there is hope for Afghanistan. And if we continue to invest in the young people, there is an opportunity for a change. Here, I want to show you, I think this is something that a lot of us have seen already in the media. And these are young girls between the ages of 15 and 19 years old, who are part of what you call the Girls Robotic Team, the Afghanistan Girls Robotic Team. And they've won a lot of awards across the world in terms of their initiative. UNICEF is actually supporting this group of young girls around promoting women and girls in science and technology in Afghanistan. And it blows your mind. I was in the field like about 2 months ago, before the coronavirus pandemic, started to spread across. And I was in Herat, and we were actually able to feel like we're in another world, because we met these girls who were actually developing drones, drones that we can use to actually distribute vaccines to hard to reach areas. And these were being done by girls between the ages of 15 to 19 years old in Afghanistan. And they come from a cross spectrum of the social strata. So it was not just like the well-to-do or the upper class girls. These were girls from rural, some of them were first time going to school. They were the only ones maybe going to school in their family, but they were coming together in this cluster to identify what are the issues affecting Afghanistan and what they can do to address it. There was another group of them that was developing actually a drone to be able to identify explosives, so that, here in Afghanistan, there's an active conflict, and the issue of unexploded ordinances is a major driver for child death in Afghanistan. So a lot of kids, playing in the field or so, pick up these unexploded ordinances and they get injured. So these girls were actually developing drones that can actually be able to identify where these, unexploded ordinances are, and they can be able to identify them and save lives, rather than people going out there to map that out. So this was fantastic. The final thing that they're doing quite recently, which we're really excited that UNICEF is a part of, is that as part of the solution in terms of responding to COVID-19, these girls just came together and say, okay, there's a whole conversation about ventilators. Can we come together and try to see how we can use local material to develop ventilators for Afghanistan? And this just went viral. And these girls have been able to pull together ventilators. They've been able to liaise with MIT and to make sure that they can sort of verify and endorse what they're doing. They work together with local and international medical teams to just see whether this is functional. And I'm proud to say that we have ventilators ready, prepared by these girls, and UNICEF is going to buy these ventilators from these people so that we can continue to invest in them and send it to remote and difficult areas where we know that it's going to be impossible to get any of the PPE or the materials needed for COVID-19 response. So this has been an amazing journey, and we just wanted to showcase that the voices of young people could be heard, even in a difficult context like Afghanistan. Social media is an amazing tool that we can use to amplify their voices. If they cannot be seen in public, their voices can still be heard. And if you go to the UNICEF social media platform, UNICEF Afghanistan, I encourage you to go to our Twitter, Facebook, and websites, and you would see amazing content from across the country demonstrating how the voices of children could be heard, even during COVID-19. I want to stop here so that we use our 20 minutes, and I want to do a quick segue to my colleague, Pasia, who will go a little bit more deep dive of how young people have been engaged in the COVID-19 response in terms of behavior change. Thank you, everybody, and over to you, Cassie.
Hello, thanks, Alison. Welcome, everyone, again. So this is Cassia. So I'm going to take you to a different part of Afghanistan. It's actually a different world from what you're used to. So this is Nangarhar province. as Alison mentioned, Afghanistan is actually connected to at least 6 or 7 countries. One of them is Pakistan. So Nangarhar province is it in the eastern side of Afghanistan, and we are going to a very remote rural area where most of the children and adolescents, they don't have access to many of the goods that we are having in different parts of the world, right? So to start with, many youth and children, they're not having access to means of communication there, meaning that the television, sometimes they don't have access, sometimes only radio, telephone, almost never, and internet is still a dream to come. So it's essential to make some youth and adolescents, as well as elderly people, as you see in this picture, aware about the COVID-19, right? As a very dangerous virus it is. So how can we reach this population? The response actually came from our colleagues working with Communication for Development in Nangarhar province, based on an existing project. As you see, there is a bike over there. And this project, it's called Mobile Bicycle Library. So what this is about? Basically, it was a project launched in 2018, and it is about education. Some students were very unhappy with the fact that children could not go to school, essentially girls, as Alison mentioned. It's very difficult for a girl to go to school in this country due to the armed conflict, and due to the fact that sometimes we don't have female teachers. But then these students were doing the advocacy at the community level, talking with the parents, with the grandpas, and say, it's very important for the girls to go to school. But if they can't go, here we are. And what they do is something called edutainment. So it's a mix between education and entertainment. So they are basically storytellers. They are bringing very interesting books for these children to learn how to, to draw, how to read, how to write, how to be very fascinated about the world of literature. So this is a very successful project. What we are doing now with COVID-19 is to take the same people, the same volunteers, and leading them to very hard to access places that Leticia is going to show in the next slide. As you know, Afghanistan is a very mountainous country. So the only way to get there sometimes is not even by car, it's going by bike. And as you see there, these adolescents and kids, basically they are children, those in this group, they are receiving, it's not a properly training, but it's an orientation on how to behave during these hard times on COVID-19. So as you can see, they are keeping from each other at least 1 meter distance. And some of them are wearing masks, but not in this picture, because the access to masks is also difficult. But mainly what they have to know is about hand washing in critical times. I would like you to know about the critical times, but as Alison did about the fruits, I'm doing another quiz and asking you, what are the critical times for hand washing? So maybe you can answer in our chat. So these kids are already understanding about these critical times. And one very beautiful thing about this project is that they are not only listeners. They've been orientated to teach their parents and their grandparents, as well as their friends. And Leticia is going to show in the next picture, for example. You can see this is a very, very rural area. They are in the middle of a crop. They are probably planting potatoes or other type of vegetables which I cannot recognize. Maybe you can help me. And you can see that there is a trainer with a mask, and there is a grandpa, and there are kids and some other adults between them. So they are basically being pushed to pass the message forward, so that they can influence more people. So this is pretty much the role of the adolescents during the COVID-19 response in this project. This is another very beautiful picture where the instructor is showing how to hand wash in a very effective way. It's not only, that again, there is a lack of access to potable and clear water in these regions. So what they need to know is how to use this very little amount of water properly. So it's a it's something that you guys are not used to it, but Afghans, they have to cope with very little amount of water and make this hand washing very effective to protect themselves against COVID-19. So the next picture shows that, you know, they're learning how to do it. So they basically have to scrub, to rub during 20 seconds or so in very different ways, very energetic, and use a little amount of water, which is actually is available for them. And this one is my favorite picture. This little girl is very happy, showing that, you know, she's on the way, and she can also teach her other peers and even the family. I would like to show you now a video. We've been doing many TV spots, radio spots, for those who are not necessarily in the remote areas, but are more in Kabul and other big cities. And one of these videos is called Cricket. So you're going to see the story, what it is about. And this is one of up to 15 videos that we are working during the COVID-19 response in Afghanistan. It is about behavior change.
احمد بیا که کرکت کنیم.
نه تو پیت خودم را خود بگیرم.
احمد در دستگیر دروازه دست نزن. صبر، بیرون نری.
سلام خاله جان، احمد کجاست؟
خاله جان ما پشت احمد آمدیم تا در بیرون بازی کنیم.
قند خالش، احمد دیگه تا یک چند وقت در خانه می باشه. در خانه درس میخونه و ساتیری میکنه.
چرا خاله جان؟
بچیم، به خاطر که خدای نخواسته ما را مرض کرونا نگیره، باید از این مرض خود نگاه کنیم و در خانه باشیم. شما هم لطفاً برین خانه‌تان، در خانه‌تان درس بخونین و ساتیری کنین. اتنا که خدای نخواسته مریض شوین.
خب خاله جان، ما هم میریم خانه. بریم بلال بچه‌ش خانه که حال کرونا مار نگیره.
احمد بچیم بیا ما و توم دستای خدا بشوییم.
So as you saw it, this is a human scenario that has nothing to do with the previous pictures that I showed to you. And cricket is a very important sport in this country. And our goodwill ambassador, Hashid, it's a cricket player. So Afghans love cricket, essentially children and adolescents. They dream about being a cricket star in the future. So I will stop from here and give the word back to Letizia and to you all for your questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Letizia, okay for me to initiate the Q&A session?
Please, go ahead.
Wonderful.
We're ready to answer.
Wonderful. So for those on the line, please do submit your questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And we, through the Global Campus platform, already received about 20 questions from students from all over the globe. So lots of interest in this topic. A lot of questions around the COVID-19 response, about conflict, about education, gender equality, health and poverty. So we might not be able to get through all of it, but let's give it a go and get started. So what was just raised by Shrivas was a question that a number of students asked through Global Campus. So it's about COVID-19 response. What is Afghanistan as a government doing to help prevent the spread of COVID-19? And a number of students also wanted to know whether or not it has been effective so far.
Okay, so I can take this one. We are working very closely with the Ministry of Public Health in Afghanistan and following the strict orientations about the ministry in order to elaborate our campaigns in response to COVID-19. So I would say that is not different from the other parts of the world. We are basically working with very key messages. One of them is about hygiene. So it's hand washing in critical times. Maybe I'm going to say what are the critical times, if there was no one trying to to guess. So basically, they are after and before going to the toilet, after and before having meals, and every time everyone is touching surfaces that it's kind of unreliable, meaning that could be in your own place, in your home, as well as in the outside. So every time you touch people, you touch surfaces, you have to clean your hands. So critical times are not anymore about toilet and meals. The second big message from the government is about stay home, which is very complicated for Afghans to cope due to this very fragile economy based on people who are selling products on the streets, or they have to make their livings in a very informal way, right? And the third and last, it's about keeping some social distancing or physical distance when we have to go outside home. And even between your family now, we just had a very important celebration called Eid. It was the end of Ramadan, and we were advised to not to meet the families. So for Afghans, to avoid the families during this special celebration was a big sacrifice. Yeah, so that's the way we are coping with COVID-19. The schools are not working, they stopped their services, as well as different other public services. And of course, the aerial trips, aircrafts are not going back and forth, so very limited access to transportations. And I hope I could answer your questions.
And maybe if I can add to Kassia's answer, and in a way answer another question that I saw on the screen on what is the focus of UNICEF in Afghanistan. We are supporting the government of Afghanistan in all of our sectors of intervention to respond to COVID-19. And these sectors are health, nutrition, water, sanitation and hygiene, education, child protection, and social inclusion. So these are our regular programming. And now with a new challenge in Afghanistan, we need to adapt our programs to a new context. For example, in the sector of education, while schools are closed, we are still working to make sure that when the schools reopen, they will be ready to host children safely. So we are working to upgrade their water system, to ensure that the toilets are functioning, because if we don't do that now in support of the government, by the time that the schools reopen, we may face a new rise in cases in Afghanistan. So everything we're doing now is in support of our regular programs, but in a way it's adapted to the new challenge that is COVID-19. Over.
Great, thank you both. So in a related question is, how have young people in refugee camps been impacted by COVID-19, and what has UNICEF's response been specifically in the refugee camp context?
Okay, thank you very much. This is, I'll try to answer that. This is Alison. We visited a number of the refugee camps. The situation there is there. I mean, there's no going back around it. There is limited space. We visited one called Hizratullah in Mazar, just on the outskirts of Mazar Sharif in the northern part of Afghanistan. And a number of these people are actually living in tents. So, you know, you have a family of maybe the average Afghan family is between 6 to 8. So you have a family of, let me say, 8, and they are living within a tent. So the issue of social distancing is a big challenge. It's almost impossible. Another issue is UNICEF used to have what you call child-friendly spaces in these camps, yeah? And in these child-friendly spaces, UNICEF used to provide psychosocial support for children, but at the same time, there was a lot of education going on. So you had 2 batches of classes where you had the younger children in the morning and the older children in the afternoon. Now, because of COVID-19 and the concern about the spread, these child-friendly spaces are closed. So when, and interestingly, I went to the field with Kassia. When we went to these internally displaced camps, the kids were running behind us and saying, why are our school closed? Why are we not going to school? And spontaneously, they started singing a song. And if you go to on our social media platform, there is one of a very young kid who was actually singing and showing us how he's gonna wash his hands, you know, during COVID-19. So the knowledge is there, right? attitude is right. They really want to do it, but in the context in which they find themselves, it's difficult to translate that into practice. So that's a reality that we needed to recognize, that things like social distancing, even hand washing, like Cassia mentioned to you, yes, they know how to wash their hands, but with a limited amount of water and a family of 8, they may have to walk a bit of a distance to have access to water and fetch water home. Then they have to cook, they have to have a bath, they have to, so there's so much demand for the little water they have. The question comes in, are they washing their hands as frequently as they're supposed to wash it? So it is a question. So in terms of the kids who are already at high risk, yes, it is a challenge during COVID. Currently, we are not sure what the spread is because, of course, in Afghanistan, the issue of testing is still a big challenge. So we may not even know what the spread is in those vulnerable communities. The numbers that we are seeing in Afghanistan today are mainly from the main cities. So even in the rural areas, we're not sure what the situation is. One mechanism by which we try to track, whether there's been a spike among this vulnerable population is among what UNICEF calls is mobile health teams. So what we did was to have almost medical teams in a caravan, in a container that's mobile, and they move these containers from one location to the other. So one of the ways by which we try to measure, the impact of COVID in these camps is to see whether there's been a spike in either flu-related or respiratory-related, infections. So with that type of indication, you then, you can do a trajectory and say, well, okay, maybe it's this percentage higher than last year, and so there's a probability of having COVID, because it's not absolute. So this is the situation in the IDP camps. It's not the optimal, but definitely the message is out there. The knowledge, the attitude is definitely right. And the supplies to make sure that they can practice as much as possible within the context is what UNICEF is doing. Over to you.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So similarly to how COVID-19 is impacting children's access to education, there were a number of questions around how conflict has negatively impacted children's access to schools and to getting a good education. So I'll cherry pick one of the many questions around this. From Ram, I've heard that children there in Afghanistan are struggling to go to school due to the terrorist attacks. So how do the children there manage their studies? So yeah, maybe this one just again around kind of what UNICEF is doing to mediate the impact of conflict on education.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And it's interesting. Before I got to Afghanistan myself, I thought it was just this massive war zone where everything is in a total quagmire and nothing is really happening. But what has really challenged me beyond measure is the resilience of the Afghan people. I can share with you that since the post-Taliban time from 2001 to now, UNICEF, together with the partners and the Ministry of Education, has been able to get 9.5 million children back in school. Prior to that, there were only 100,000 kids in school. Yeah. So UNICEF has been able to get 9.5 million children back in school over this, like almost a 2-decade period. And in addition to what you call the formal school, there are what you call the madrasas. These are not necessarily counted as part of the formal school, so we don't necessarily have the numbers of that. But within these madrasas, which are have an orientation from the religious perspective, so their core is teaching the Quran, but within those schools, they're also doing the course subjects that are part of the national education curriculum. So they will do the math, they will do the Dari, the Pashto, and they will do the language arts or whatever the way they narrate that. So the kids are doing the arts, the maths, and the languages in these madrasas. So you do have another couple of millions of children in these madrasas who are not necessarily counted within the formal schools. The final part of that is UNICEF has supported the government to establish what we call community-based education, So these are really like an informal setting where they are very close, and this is really, really an added value, especially for the girls. So these are sort of schools in quotes that are really within a community. So it may be the living room of a family, or the bedroom of a family, or the outside space of a family. But then you do have teachers who have been trained by UNICEF and the Ministry of Education, going through the school curriculum. And what UNICEF was able to advocate for was that even though this was supposed to be like an informal school setting, they were taught the national curriculum. So these kids who are going to the what we call community-based education centers, they are able to transition into formal school when they go past grade 4. So after grade 4 in some areas, or after grade 6 in some areas, these kids can actually take the national exam and continue their education. So that has been amazing. So over the last 2 to 3 years, UNICEF has been able to get 500,000 children into these community-based education centers. So in a nutshell, if you pull it all together, we do have over 10 million children and young people who are actually in formal learning based on the Afghanistan curriculum. Unfortunately, with COVID-19 and the closure of all schools, these 10 million plus children are now losing on learning. There is some amount of online education going on with the Ministry of Education, through radio, TV, etc., but it's only reaching 1 million of these former 9.5 million children. So 8.5 of the 9.5 who were in school are now not having access to learning. And that's why, like Leticia mentioned, UNICEF is actually advocating at some point for the reopening of schools, taking into consideration the social distancing, etc., so that we do not lose the gains we have made in moving towards SDG 4. Over to you.
Great, very comprehensive. So a number of questions around education, and you touched on it, but one of the questions from Rylan is, where is education on the UN's priorities in Afghanistan's list? Sounds like UNICEF has been doing a lot on education, and would you say that that is a #1 priority, or very, very high on the list, or where would it fall in that priority list?
Well, I would say it's very high on the list. In Afghanistan, there's so much that has to be done for children. You know, there's the issue of vaccination. You know, in Afghanistan, I can just touch base on that very quickly. Only 51% of the children are vaccinated. Yeah. And that's, the numbers are even worse than in sub-Saharan Africa, where you think that you have some of the worst health systems. So only 1 in 2 children are vaccinated. So again, the issue of child mortality is a top priority, because if they don't survive those first 5 years of life, they never get into school anyways. So education is a top priority. There's also the issue of the protection of children. I mean, in a conflict environment like this, calling for parties to the conflict to desist from maybe attacking schools, attacking, you know, civilian population, etc. Major call, and it's something that is recognized by all the development partners, humanitarian partners, and even the government itself recognizes that. But you know, it's been 4 decades of war in Afghanistan, and it still remains a challenge. So the priorities for children are just enormous. But then again, like Leticia mentioned, for UNICEF, we have to focus on those 6 programmatic areas. So definitely, in answer to your question, education is definitely a top priority amongst many others. Over to you.
I think that's a really helpful answer, because a number of these students that are here with us today have been studying the SDGs, and this country context of Afghanistan really illustrates how interdependent issues are for improving people's lives or children's lives. So as you mentioned, education really relies on health and protection issues, and so on and so forth. So thank you for that. A extended question around education is about gender equality and education, and whether or not the situation has improved for girls to equally attend school as boys, or and then also after graduating from secondary school, do girls have the same opportunities as boys do?
Okay, I'll take that again. What we observe is that, like I mentioned before, Afghanistan is quite a conservative environment. So, and this is disproportionate for girls and women, unfortunately. We noticed that in the early grades, like grade 1, we do have close to some amount of gender parity. But then as we move into the upper classes, the girls disappear. And this is because of a number of factors. One is the cultural belief in terms of the value that is placed in boys in terms of girls. And that the belief is that investing, if I have to do, make a choice, I will prefer to invest in the boys than invest in the girls. Secondly, there's the issue of early or child marriage in Afghanistan. So as soon as the girl gets to puberty, because the country is, the constitution of the country is based on the Sharia and the Islamic principles, it indicates that when a girl gets to puberty, no matter the age that manifests itself, that girl is no longer a girl, the girl becomes a woman. So then there's that shift from going to school and getting married, or coming back home and being now groomed to become a wife and a mother, no matter how young you are. So there's that other consideration. The third part of it is that poverty is a major driver. So I have met some families where the father said, I really wanted my daughter to go to school. I really wanted to make a difference, but either because of conflict, either because of drought, either because of one thing or the other, they lost their livelihood, and then they had to make a tough choice as to what to do with their daughters. So again, that disproportionately affects the girls. So yes, it's a definite challenge. Afghanistan remains, I think it's only above Yemen and I think Somalia in terms of the gender gap. But then yes, there's a serious issue around girls and women's empowerment. Like I showed you in the videos and the photos that we shared, there is a caucus of them pushing against those social norms, but still they're translating those initiatives into a movement that will really pick up and shift the whole dynamics in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it may take another generation to get to. Over to you.
So that definitely touches on some of the gender equality questions that have been raised, and in some of the in sort of the preparatory materials that you shared, there was a document about the girls who are taking action in their lives and speaking up about certain issues, including gender-based violence. So we have one question about children subject to violence, and if children are able to speak up about it, about being victim to violence, or whether or not that is frowned upon and difficult to do.
Unfortunately, I could say that that's still a challenge. That's still an issue of a taboo. So even though we are aware from anecdotal evidence that there is gender-based violence and abuse of children either within the home or in the school or within the community, is very difficult to verify, because there's still a lot of stigma attached to that. There's a lot of discrimination, and there's a lot of how would you call it, the negative response by the community. So in some cases, if these children actually go out and speak out, first of all, the mechanisms for reporting are not necessarily there, right? So you need to have a trusted system in place for children to feel comfortable to go out there and raise their voice. That safety net does not necessarily exist. So even when families are aware that something has happened to their child, most times their daughter, they don't necessarily explain this to everybody. What UNICEF has done is that we've established at the community level what you call child protection action networks. They're called CPANs. So these are highly respected individuals within the communities, you know, whether a teacher, religious leader, a nurse, a health worker, whatever the case may be, that come together and create this sort of a safety safe space for kids to be able to go, or their parents or their mothers to be able to go and explain where some of these things happen. But again, like I said, the mechanisms for reporting, the mechanisms to even address victims of gender-based violence is still at an embryo stage in Afghanistan. We are virtually breaking the taboo, breaking that mold for people to start talking about it. But I think we still have a long way to go around that. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. For those who are live with us, we recommend going through some of those really interesting preparatory materials shared. So pivoting a bit subject-wise, we got a question around the state of environment in Afghanistan, and you presented the Friday for Futures marches. So curious what the state of kind of natural preservation is in Afghanistan, and specifically in the region, how does Afghanistan stand in their environmental sustainability efforts?
On that score, I don't have all the data offhand, but one of the things that I can say is that there are efforts being made, but there's still room for improvement. One of the things that Afghanistan really is challenged by is the issue of pollution. And that is also driven by poverty. So for instance, during the winter season, it's very difficult. It's sometimes the pollution level in Afghanistan is sometimes even worse than Delhi, sometimes worse than in China, because you know, 54% of the population are poor. So they could not afford heaters. They could not afford, I mean, power supply is really intermittent, you know, so they don't have electricity to have heaters. So most of them have to use very local materials just to keep themselves warm. So like earlier this year, we did a piece on, you know, how are people coping in terms of the air pollution and everything in Afghanistan. And we realized that, you know, people tell you, I know it's wrong, but they burn tires, they burn, you know, they burn plastic, they burn wood, they burn coal, they burn, you know, anything that can keep them warm. And we interviewed one of the gentlemen and we're saying, you know, do you understand what this is doing? Do you understand about the climate? Do you know that this can have an impact? He said, yes, I understand. He says, but that's a slow death for me. Whereas if I don't keep my family warm, I may lose them before the end of the winter season. So I have to make a choice between losing my family against the end of the winter season due to cold, or knowing that there's going to be a slow death and we're going to be inhaling polluted air. And, you know, when you find yourself in that position, it's, you know, you almost want to ask yourself, what do I say in response to that? Because it's such a grim reality on the ground. So yes, there is a long way to go. And I think maybe that's the plus of COVID-19 now. The air has been the purest I've had in Afghanistan, and I've been here for 2 years. It's the purest that I've had for a very long time. You know, the airspace is clear. You know, it's spring, it's lovely. We are approaching summer. It's really amazing. But yes, in the long term, there is a major issue. In addition to everything else that Afghanistan has to deal with, there is that major issue of addressing the climatic issues here. Over to you.
Wow, I didn't know that pollution could be as bad or worse than Delhi or parts of China. That's really interesting. So I think to come to a close, we're gonna have one last question. I'm gonna kind of put two in one. So personal to the two or to the three of you, you mentioned how many languages are spoken in Afghanistan. So how many languages do you each speak? And what is the most memorable activity that you've done either at UNICEF or to protect children in general?
Okay, maybe I am one of the newest here together with Letizia. I think we both arrived between November, right? Letizia, October, November. I came latest November last year. So the language I speak is Portuguese. I'm Brazilian national, and between my colleagues I speak English. Understanding Afghanistan complexity, I can only say some salutation words, no more than that. So it's a salam alaikum. I can eventually try one or another word to say thank you, tashakot. But yeah, it's very complex and beautiful country in that sense. Related to your second question, something remarkable that I remember in 6 months, actually, thanks to COVID, I accelerated my process of going to the field and has been amazing. I took at least 2 times to journals with Alison and team. And I remember, I think the IDP camp, the internally displaced population in Mazar-e-Sharif was very remarkable for me as a trip and as a personal experience to see the contribution of UNICEF when it comes to basic resources that we need to provide during the COVID response. That's it. Thank you.
Great, I'll go quickly. I'm Letizia and I speak 3 languages. I speak Italian, as I am Italian, English and Spanish. I will share a memory of Afghanistan. I was also able to go to the field a few months ago and I visited the site of Bamiyan, which is a province in the central part of Afghanistan. And some of you may have heard of Bamiyan because it's the site where 3 very large Buddhas were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001. And while the Buddhas are no longer there, it remains a touristy site. It's a site that UNESCO is working to preserve and conserve. And it's a site where you can still feel an amazing energy and you can really feel how rich the culture and history of Afghanistan is.
Okay, this is Alison. I speak, I would say 3 languages. I speak English, I speak French, and I speak a little bit of what we call the Creole language. It goes across a little bit of the Caribbean areas as well as some of West Africa, and it's a very interesting dialect of its own. So yes, so I include it as one of my languages. It may not be a UNICEF official language, but it's one of the languages that I speak. In terms of what has been one of the most memorable moments in Afghanistan, I mean, there's so many amazing moments here. I think I'll choose one where I was in Daikundi in the central highlands of Afghanistan. This is one of the most mountainous areas in this country. It's just out of this world. And I was actually flying in with the Minister of Education and the then UNICEF representative. And we're going to look at one of the schools that UNICEF had built with the support of the Japanese. UNICEF was building 70 schools across the country to especially targeting girls so that we can get girls into the schools. So the schools were being built closer to the communities than where they were before. And it was an amazing thing because we had like an hour's flight and then we had to drive to the top of the school. I mean, it was so amazing because we got to a point where somebody said, are we actually going into the clouds? It was really amazing. We went really at the top of a mountain where I never thought that UNICEF could have a school. And it was like going to the end of the world and suddenly we turned this curve and there was this massive school with over 900 children in the school, screaming and shouting as they saw the UNICEF car come in. For me, I was never more proud of being a UNICEF staff member than when I saw those kids, almost at the end of the world. And I think that's a memory I'll take with me wherever I go, that with UNICEF, we are on the ground, reaching every child, no matter the terrain, whether we need to cross rivers, climb mountains, or whatever it takes, whether it's a conflict or not conflict, whether it's COVID or non-COVID, UNICEF is always there, making sure that we leave no child behind. And that's a memory I'll walk with. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the three of you. That was a beautiful way to wrap up with some of your best memories. And I think you did a great job depicting the diverse issues and that children and young people face in Afghanistan. So thank you so much to everyone for being here with us. And we'll follow up on some of the questions we couldn't answer. But Allison, Cassia, Leticia, thank you, and hope you have a great evening. Till next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.